Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Okay. Hey guys, I was recommended this video by someone who knew that I enjoy the deceptive tactics used in World War II, mainly by the British, and to check this one out. So I am. Preemptive like, do a subscribe, Hull History Nerd, History of Hull, the Decoy Docks. Let's go. Let's learn. Hope everyone's doing well.
Well, in this episode of the History of Hull, I'm going to be taking a look at a wartime magic trick that saved thousands of lives, the decoy docks.
I'm forgetting where exactly Hull is, but I'm assuming it's on the southern coast of England. I've definitely heard of Hull, but peat bogs? Sort of ominous.
When Britain joined the Second World War in 1939, Hitler knew that his usual tactic of blitzkrieg, of roaring across the countryside with high-speed panzer divisions and infantry, wouldn't work because there was a sea in the way, and whatever else he may have thought of himself, Hitler knew that the British Navy still ruled the waves. Any attempt to land tanks or troops on British soil would end in disaster for him. However, he did believe quite firmly that his Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, was superior to the Royal Air Force. And as you know, Britain's Blitz was superior to the Royal Air Force. And as you know, Britain's Blitz came from above. For almost 2 solid years, cities across the country were pounded by high explosives, incendiaries and mines. Industrial regions, ports, commercial areas, airfields, munitions factories. But there was also another purpose, not just disrupting Britain's ability to wage war, but also demoralising the nation. The bombers were also tasked with targeting civilian areas, houses.
Sorry, I just wanted to say something. I see so many similarities between Nazi Germany or Germany in World War II and Napoleonic France. Not in their, overall ideology, obviously, but they ruled the land. They would win battles normally on land. Britain was king of the sea. They tried to invade. They had plans to invade the UK. I believe Napoleon had some plans to invade the UK. It's just that was out of the question after Trafalgar, right? They both lost basically everything when invading Russia or the Soviet Union, Russian Empire, and then Soviet Union. So many similarities.
To wage war, but also demoralising the nation. The bombers were also tasked with targeting civilian areas, houses. The top brass of Britain got their minds together to try and find out any.
I'm sorry, guys. I just let me back up like 20 seconds. I've just
wage war.
Okay.
So another purpose, not just disrupting Britain's ability to wage war, but also demoralising the nation. The bombers were also tasked with targeting civilian areas, houses. The top brass of Britain got their minds together to try and find out any way they could to distract these attacks from these vulnerable areas. And what they came up with was a magic trick on a par with anything that David Copperfield would have come up with. These decoys were divided into 2 broad types, those intended to be seen during the day and those designed to be invisible during the day, but to fool the bombers when they made their runs during the night. The first kind of decoy included fake industrial buildings, plants and air bases, the idea being that during the day when the German scout planes would fly over taking their aerial photographs, they would mark down the fake sites and divert attention from the real ones. However, the second type required far more ingenuity. If a scout plane flew overhead and photographed, for example, an actual fake town with fake docks in the middle of nowhere, the bomber pilots would know to avoid the obvious fakes and carry on to their real targets. Somehow they had to build a fake dock that was invisible during the day, but so obvious at night that the bomber pilots would be completely fooled. And, like all good magic tricks, it was done with mirrors. Well, reflections, at least. Now, during the air raids, obviously cities were blacked out. All the non-essential lights were turned off to try and minimise the amount that the Germans could see from the air when they were coming in to bomb. But there were some lights that couldn't be turned out, some emergency lights around the docks, for instance, because if you had a complete blackout at the docks, it would be far too easy for unsuspecting dockhands or emergency workers to stroll off the quayside and into the icy black waters of the dock. And these lights, dim though they were, reflected off the water at the edges of the dock and basically did a join the dots pattern from the air that spelled out the shape of the dock. And that is one of the ways in which the Germans were guided in to bomb the dock areas.
So they would make lights in other places to confuse them?
Other things that the Germans used to use as guides were, bizarrely enough, the sparking from tram wires overhead on the main roads. And Holderness Road itself was so heavily bombed, partly because the Germans would see this coming in from the east and would drop the bombs along that sparking track. And this was the genius of what they actually did, because they didn't build an entire set of fake docks. They didn't dig out huge docks, because obviously, as I said, that would have been visible from the air for the scout planes during the day. No, what they did was genius. They dug out a series of ponds, small concrete tanks filled with water with a wooden pole and a small light at the top, in the pattern of the emergency lights that were around the docks. So they didn't need the entire area filled with water. They just needed these little ponds filled with water.
Genius. And are some of these... So you can still see like where they dug out the ponds, but are some of these other areas where they're water filled in where Germans dropped bombs?
And again, like a join the dots, when you switched all of these ponds on, they basically made a scale model of Hull's docks from the air. And in the night, there's no way to distinguish that from the real thing, apart from the fact that this was about a third the size. But it wasn't just that. The other things, like the sparking tram lines, for instance, were also emulated. There was a string of flickering lights in the field just to the north of the decoy docks themselves, and a whole bunch of fake fires to represent where bombs had apparently dropped and started firestorms. In effect, they created a blacked out city of Hull in the fields and by the Humber, in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely genius. During the day, the German scout planes would see nothing but marshland filled with pools of water. But on an evening, they would see a 1/3 scale model of Hull and its docks. The size wasn't that important. It was very easy in those days to misjudge your altitude, especially flying in the dark. And that wasn't the only thing they had. A pair of drains that ran inland parallel to one another had one bank on each side raised and the land between them flooded to make it look like the River Hull. Decoys using simulated lighting and fires like this were codenamed Starfish for the fires and QL for the lighting. Ingenious sites like this sprang up across the country, diverting bombers to effectively the middle of nowhere during nighttime air raids. And Hull really needed it. During the war, Hull was targeted by raids over 80 times, becoming one of the worst hit cities in the country. Its placing on the east coast made it an easy target to reach, and also a convenient place for raids that had gone further inland to drop any remaining bombs on the way back to Germany. These Starfish and QL defences were in place by August 1941. But the bitter irony of it is that in 1941, Hitler decided to pick a fight with a sleeping bear. He declared war on the Soviet Union. That didn't go well for him. You may already know this, but he had to throw almost everything that he had, including the Luftwaffe, into that Eastern Front. And that meant that the systemic bombing campaign of Britain, whilst not over, was significantly reduced. But that's not to say that Hull didn't still bear the brunt of what was left, with it being in a juicy, easy, low-hanging fruit kind of place on the east coast. It still had more than its fair share of bombing attacks. And these fake docks, without a shadow of a doubt, helped save thousands of lives. They were decommissioned finally after the war in 1945, and today all that's left of them are the ones that formed the outlines of Alexandra Dock and King George V Dock. The rest of them being either filled in by land reclamation projects or lost to the Humber itself.
Naturally.
But still, they stand here today as a brilliant reminder of a fantastic piece of wartime ingenious misdirection.
You could easily walk around here too and just imagine, you know, not knowing about this stuff and just seeing these as pretty insignificant. Like, who knows what these would have been used for, and not knowing that they played a pretty cool part in World War II, and crucial part. Good video, and it was something I am interested in. I find it fascinating, the little tricks used in World War II, again mainly by the British, of deception tactics. And I'd watched a few videos on some, but I didn't know about this at all, so it was nice to learn this. So I forget if he mentioned this, but would British planes go up, obviously unarmed, but like during the nighttime, and kind of fly over just to see like what they would attack if they were bombing Britain, and then be like, oh, this would be a pretty easy target, try and make a deception tactic on this? Or was it more just seeing where the Germans were dropping their bombs and then figuring out how they could have done that, you know? Really nice video. Whole history nerd. Great, very nice. I hope you guys are doing well. Would appreciate any comments, any answers to my questions, disagreements, whatever. You guys are always awesome in the comments. Hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.